Kilo,
Yes.
welcome back
I'm so glad to be here.
to the Are We Well podcast. And for those of you who are new to the podcast, Kilo, this is your second time here having a conversation. I strongly encourage folks to listen to the second episode with Kilo because that episode, the words, your presence, your voice, all of that was what we needed at the time and still now. The level of feedback that I've gotten in my circle, in our circle,
Yes.
it has been so positive. And so I'm just so excited to have you. I'm thrilled to have you in this conversation today. And I'm excited. Well, I'm processing a lot of things. We're post-election now, and we're gonna use today's time to talk about what wellness looks like post-election. And Trump is going to be our president. Just a couple weeks ago, we found out. It's still very fresh. And so there are a lot of emotions around this. We are at a place where it feels like the nation is so divided in a shocking way. And I think there's just a lot of energy and what I feel is sort of chaos. So I want to ask you, how are you feeling post-election? What's happening with you emotionally and just sort of how you're grappling with this sort of chaos?
Yeah, thank you for asking. And I'm glad to be here with all of you. Boy, I want to situate that question into two bigger universes. The mile deep universe, that place where we can go and search into ourselves and really know who we are and be honest about how we're feeling. And the second universe, which is the context of all the people I love and all the people that the consequence of this administration coming in and what's going to be happening to them. So, and they're interconnected. Mm-hmm. But yet some of my own privileges, my own things I take for granted can impact how I might be feeling personally versus what I'm thinking about to the concentric circles that you and I both live in. All of the people and more than human species around us. So for me, I woke up the next day and my partner Melanie gave me a kiss, gave me a hug, which doesn't happen in the mornings typically. And she said, everything's going to be okay. And then she got on a plane and flew out to Florida to work on the area that she works on, which is disasters and homelessness. Mm. So she doesn't get to say, I need to go retreat, because in her world, she either gets up, gets on a plane and goes and works on the unsheltered communities, or the unsheltered communities might stay unsheltered. Yeah. And that was the day after. And for me, I woke up and felt like there's a lot of fragments, like all of a sudden the glass shattered, mm-hmm. or the mirror shattered. And where do I begin to pick them up? That's for me. And today, at this point, I've been sorting through those shards of glass and putting back together an image of myself and saying both, what do I want to project into the world about moving forward to motivating people like my partner and younger activists to get back out there and move forward. So what do I need to feel like to get there and not pretend? So I am some days looking in the mirror and finding a beautiful human, and other days I'm looking in the mirror, and if I just turn a little bit to the left or a little bit to the right, I look angry. I look a little ferocious and a little distorted from who I am in my main disposition. But this other part of your question about how I'm doing, I'm looking out towards our community and the people that I love and know that my answer is intertwined with theirs. And some of my students that are trans are hiding parts of that trans identity to stay safe. Some of my friends and family who are new Americans, arriving Americans, or have been here for a while as immigrants are feeling deep insecurity about their grandparents, their parents, and their children. And will the dreamers of college get to graduate, or will they be swept up illegally and pushed across the border that they don't even understand? And so holding both the motivating of others, pulling my own shards together to create the image I want, and at the same time knowing that there are people who are not even close to being able to do that yet because they're having to hide who they are at this moment, places me into two not dichotomies, but two different flows inside of my body. How are you? How are you?
I appreciate the way you said that. And when you look in the mirror and you see yourself and you see this distorted self, the way I feel is similar in that there's, the day after, for me, it wasn't a shock that Trump was going to win. That was not a shock to me. The shock, and this might be completely delusional that I was living in, was the level and amount of which he won. Like it was a sort of a quick, here's where our humanity actually is. And that was hard to see. And so that part of you that feels angry, or the part of you that is maybe in some rage, that part of me came out really quickly because I was so, I guess, naive. I don't know. But I also know how privileged I am to be that naive, to be that disillusioned. So I think I'm grappling with that right now, is where our society has shown us to be right now in the moment when it comes to humanity and caring for those who are at the margins, and also finding the humanity in it and finding hope still,
Right.
and still kind of protecting this delusion in some sense, like kind of going back to hope. So a short answer, I'm feeling disheartened. I feel disheartened, and I'm trying to work through that even now. And this is why this conversation and just hearing it from you is the way you verbalize it, the words that you use to express how you're feeling is just so beautiful, because it's all these different things that are living out at once. I know a lot of people are feeling the same, but yeah, I'm still processing.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I think we'll process, well, when there's systemic violence, which this particular leader has not only contributed to, but articulates. When there is systemic violence that is a method in which to create change, I think that collective trauma will be an ongoing need for processing. So, like when you're saying I'm still processing, think about any time we're traumatized.
Yeah.
The number one way we're traumatized is about the way our bodies are violated.
Yeah.
So we're violated. And we can see that the mechanisms of the justice system, the mechanisms of the political system are going to try to violate us physically, not just spiritually. So the processing and wondering about the language of survivor versus victim. Like we use the word survivor to say that when we are victimized or traumatized, there's a value in empowerment and how we learn to survive. And so we consciously choose that language over saying that we are the victim of this administration, of this leader. No, we are survivors.
Yeah.
And in the next 4 years, we will be counting on each other about what does it mean to survive, but also in that space of surviving, how do we get back to thriving?
Right.
And how will it instruct us in our survival to move to a new place of not just adapting, because adapting doesn't mean, when we adapt doesn't mean we've learned.
Yeah.
It means that we adjusted. But when we have to adapt, when we have to find new language, when we have to show up differently, what are we going to learn from that that will hopefully one day allow us to show up not just as if we matter, but as if we can find the joy we've always sought and that we are trying to hold for those that don't get to experience it.
Yeah. And you remind me of, so the last conversation, you had said something about, and I actually have shorts, it's like snippets of this particular clip from the last episode, where you said, keep the door open. And I am reminded of that now because we're walking into a holiday season. And a lot of people are going to be around their family members, their loved one, their friends, people that are close in their circle. And then also some might be confronted with folks that have complete different political aspects and viewpoints from them. And so how do you keep the door open in this time? And in particular for me, I have a loved one who voted for Trump. And I think it was tough for me to reconcile, still tough for me to reconcile, because my instinct, the angry part in that mirror, wants to say, I'm cutting you off. We're so different. We are fundamentally different. Our belief systems, our values, they are so different. But then the other part of me is, I love this person. We have years of relationship built. And so how can one keep the door open in this sort of conflict and still stay true to their values and their own authenticity and their boundaries? What could that look like?
Yeah. Well, I don't have the answer, but I struggle in the same ways. And again, when I look back in the mirror and I feel distorted and I look a little bit to the left and I feel like there's the hurt and or angry Kilo.
Yeah.
And then but that's not the one that I want to be nurturing. There's a one about wanting to heal and to feel in collective space with my community that sometimes the angry one can't allow. And I think about what I grapple with is knowing that there are loved ones in my space who are voting differently than I am, and that their votes may put my life in jeopardy. And then wondering do we abandon the relationship? Do we let it go? Is that what you do?
Mm-hmm.
Do you now just find solace in the family that you choose, your chosen family versus your biological family? Is that what happens? Do we look towards divorce?
Mm-hmm.
Or do we look towards the mending? Well, when we think about things like a divorce, for example, of two people who loved each other their whole lives but then decided to go different directions, one of the things that is abandoned in that was all the time spent loving each other. The
Mm-hmm.
times in which you opened your heart to them and felt vulnerable around them, and the people around you who witnessed that. But then in the aftermath, the divorce feels much like we can't have that anymore.
Mm-hmm.
And still there's a space in which you may re-find each other
Yeah.
to celebrate things. Maybe you have children between each other and you want to show an example of what that could look like. But yet there's still hurt,
Mm-hmm.
right, involved. So I'm grappling with all of that because I have loved ones who've split apart and or for different reasons. But I do see what happens to the broader community when they don't love each other anymore the way they used to.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And that's healing for them too. So do you take a path that says, I'm staying somewhere near you? Do you follow the path that says, I want you out of my life? I think the door open idea is there must be a radical middle,
Mm.
a place that says there should be at least opportunity to mend if it's possible. And what's my role in that? Not that you can do all of it yourself, but what is my role? And what is the repercussions if I don't leave a little bit open?
Yeah.
And what might my broader community lose out on? Because at some point we loved each other. So what happened in all of it?
Yeah.
But when it comes to family and in this holiday, like getting back to this, thinking about all of the people who listen to this podcast and are searching for the answers of what am I going to do with my uncle who's going to be at a celebration and they are espousing political jargon that feels hateful to me, what am I going to do with them?
Mm-hmm.
And I'm in my mind like, well, the only person you can control in this is yourself.
Yeah.
And you can't change them. But is there a space in which you can find a glimmer of way to preserve a relationship? Is it possible to find just a common denominator, one commonality that you can find with them? And maybe that's where you restart anew. But this is true. You're not going to change them because they can only change themselves, just like we can only change ourselves.
Right.
But I do have hope that when that young queer child shares with their grandparents that they change their pronouns and or have to share their partner that their grandparents aren't used to, and their grandparents' response is negative, I have hope that those grandparents will reflect and a glimmer of light will show, a crack in the closet
Yeah.
will hold, and they can find a way to love that grandchild and realize they're the ones that need to do the work, not the grandchild
Yeah.
in that moment.
Yeah.
That's my hope anyways.
Yeah. No, I think that's so beautiful. And difficult from a place of hurt. But once you are able to mend just yourself or even show love for yourself, the angry version of yourself, then you're able to maybe find that love in others. But it could be hard to get to, especially when things are so raw. And like just, we're talking about a couple of weeks ago, but we're also talking about centuries and we're talking about many years ago. And I think the thing that has been really interesting for me, and I'm curious to know if you felt the same thing. In social justice work and advocacy, there's this little voice. And sometimes for me, she's loud. And this voice is like, I call her sort of the social justice critic. I lovingly call her a kutti, which is in Hindi means bitch. And she will pop up. And she'll pop up and say, you're really not going to cut this person off? You're not going to stand up for those who don't have a voice? You're so privileged. Look at you. Who are you? Why are you even doing this work if you can't say the thing, or if you can't in action when the opportunity is presented? If you're not going to actually do it, then who are you? And who do you think you are? You're not really a social justice advocate. You're not doing enough. You're kind of fake. Like, she's
real.
She's a kutti. Like, she's loud.
Yeah.
You know, and she will say it. And it's so interesting because there's these other parts of me, when you talk about these fragments, there's these other parts of me that is like, let me protect my peace. So let me create like boundaries that are not like, let me cut someone off, or let me pick and choose here a little bit. Let me maybe pick my battles more so. So protecting my own peace, picking my own battles. And then there's the one that wants me to find the peace, which is what you're saying, sort of figuring out a connecting point at some point. And then there's the other that wants to fight for peace. And I can be all of those things at once. But then there's this overarching voice of, no, none of these. Do something and do it now. And so it's just like all of these like parts of me in a when things are ignited, it's like I'm not doing enough. I also recognize my privilege in the fact that I could say these things and have these parts of me where I can take a step back and let me protect myself. Like, I understand sort of the nuances around this, but how, one, do you have that voice? And then, if so, how do you navigate that voice? And if you don't have that voice, what would you tell those who do? Because I think it's very common.
Yeah, I mean, I'm conjuring up my kuti right now.
Your kuti is there.
And they are the vision of a cholo. So just an old school Chicano gangster who was holding turf in their community with an identity at the doors outside of the boundary of that border outside was white supremacy.
Yep.
And inside was, how do I hold turf even amongst my own? That cholo is mixed with the voice of Malcolm X, who says, we need to separate. We need to not follow the kind message of King, because in that there's something that's whitewashed.
Yeah.
And those two somehow form this critic inside of me that says, no one will do you wrong. And no one will do anybody else wrong. And if you don't say it like it is, you have bought into the system.
Yeah.
You are the man.
Yeah.
And that person pummels me quite often.
Yeah.
And makes me feel slightly machismo, like wanting to even like go into that hyper masculine space and invoking a type of like persona that is about domination, but domination through resistance.
Yes.
So that's the connection there.
Yeah.
Domination through resistance and thinking that there is value in the violence when it comes to protecting my own and those that I love. And it comes up against this very soft, very gentle peacemaker who wants to plant seeds and thinks that the way you perpetuate unity is by being at a table with multiple voices from multiple opinions and learning to exercise your compassion. So the Dalai Lama says, which is one of my favorite quotes of the Dalai Lama, we don't learn to exercise our compassion with those that we like.
Yeah.
We learn to exercise it with those that we have a hard time liking. So when I think about exercising my unity, it's about being around folks who I disagree with. But the cholo in me is like, time has run out. Time has run out, hermano. Like, it's time to, like, fight, no more flight.
Yeah.
Like, that kind of feeling.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it beats me up all the time.
Yeah. Yeah.
I need to give him a name.
Yeah. I like cholo, but I think it's like this, it all comes, I mean, for mine, it comes from, just feeling like I'm not doing enough. Also feeling like guilt, of not doing enough. And also, like, there's just this there is a persona when it comes to social justice work and what it could look like and what it should look like. And although I know there's variations of what that looks like, it's not, when you think social justice, a lot of people think activism in the sense of marching to the Capitol or fighting against, using your voice in a way to really, and politically, sociopolitically, really fight against some of these very harmful things. But then I know that there's other ways of activism. There's art, there's creativity, there's compassion. There's all these other ways to do activism work and to resist. But I feel like this persona that's created is like, you're just not doing it. You're softening it, or you're subscribing to white supremacy in the sense, or that it's tainted in because you're eat, pray, loving it.
Right.
Right?
Yes.
You're eat, pray, loving it. And so
Well
this
said.
whole time, because it's interesting, I've gone through this healing journey, thus this podcast, and a lot of it is finding compassion in myself, quieting that inner critic, understanding where that critic comes from and what she needs and what they all need. And then I come to a point too, though, that I'm questioning, like, is this like the spiritual path, this healing path? Am I escaping the work that needs to be done, or am I doing the work that needs to be done? And I'm kind of up against that at this moment. And I love what you say, like, are we going to, how are we going to show up now? Are we going to learn from this moment? Are we going to move differently from this moment rather than just adjusting? And I've just adjusted. But I didn't do all this work to heal and to get on this path to just adjust.
That's
I
right.
do need to I need to show up differently. Like, me, my kuti needs to show up a little differently. And I'm thankful to her, but I'm also very like, this can't be the way. The surviving cannot be just the way. So I appreciate you. I mean, just all the little things that I'm learning from you right now.
I'm appreciating you too, because I'm thinking about this critic in you, and like, when does she show up? Like when do you find her voice loudest for you?
When there's the most harm being done in my community.
Okay. So what's her real job?
What's her real job?
Uh-huh.
I mean, I think she's protecting.
Yeah. Okay. So she's the protector.
She's a protector.
She's the fight.
Yeah.
Yeah. And we need her.
We totally need her.
Yeah. Like, we, in fact, without her, we roll over
Yeah.
and ask someone to scratch our bellies. We do what governors do when they're trying to be reelected and we say things that will get us the popular vote, and because we are no longer listening to that critic
Yeah.
telling us to have a backbone
Yeah.
when we make a decision. And maybe that person, that critic, is saying, whatever you do, if you adjust, and your adjustment is about being more polite in order to get by, you're part of the problem. And like, that's a good, valuable critic.
Yeah.
I think where the protector gets in the way is when we are making conscious, critical decisions and they're afraid that what we're doing might not work.
Yeah.
And so they tell us to stop and not try the new experiment. Then they're there in the way. But when we roll over, we need them the most to say, don't you dare die on your knees.
Yeah.
Die on your back.
Yeah.
Like, I think that's where I love mine. That's the one that, like, lets me still stay real and feel like people want to be in space and community with me, where I am ferocious both on how I love you and I am ferocious on making sure that you have consent and you are safe.
Yeah. So you're really, I mean, you've built a relationship, a strong relationship with your critic.
Most
In
of the time.
some sense, yeah.
And unless yours talks to mine.
Oh, interesting.
Because when your critic talks to my critic, then I ruminate and I second guess and I have doubt and I have all of the feelings of like, I've done it wrong. So I have to be aware when they're talking to each other.
Interesting.
Because I can know everything's overruled. And in this moment, when we are traumatized, our protectors do come out. And typically they come out as being hyper vigilant.
Yes.
Hyper focused, hyper scanning, looking for any way in which someone's messing with our sanctuary, messing with our boundaries, messing with our family and friends. And it's so on high alert. And when mine touches yours, both on high alert, then it seems no matter what I do, if something goes wrong, it's immediately my fault because I didn't do enough.
Yeah.
Just like my critic told me, which your critic also told them,
Yeah.
that I wasn't doing enough. And
Yeah.
I'm like, I agree.
Yeah.
And then I feel defeated
Yes.
by
Yeah.
my own community, by my own social justice, like family.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's a really hard one.
Oof. I mean, I'm just thinking about the opposite of that. That if my inner critic talks to your inner critic from the place of protection, from the place of realness, from the place of grounding us, what could happen? And how often our inner critics that are the most critical, maybe they are in the way. How often they do talk to each other. And how often we don't work together because of our own critics that are communicating in our energies together. I hadn't thought of that. I hadn't even thought about that.
I will say, though, this is, I think, an important context. I do think there's value when you are protective of me, so I don't have to be.
Yeah.
Because for whatever position and identities you have in that moment, you're like, you know what I need to conjure? My most protective person.
Yep.
To ensure that this conversation can happen, to ensure there's sanctuary in this moment so they can say what they need to say.
Yeah.
And sometimes, for me, that typically means, for my positionality as identifying as a cisgendered male, means that when I'm being protective, instead of showing up with my masculinity, it means, how do I hold space so that others around me can say what they need to say? How can I protect the space
The space.
so their voices are centered in the space?
Sure.
And what does that mean when I show up like that and spend that kind of energy bringing out probably not a cholo anymore, more like a chola. So like
Yeah.
that more
Yeah.
strong woman
Yeah.
in me.
Yeah.
Same thread cut, but a little bit different
Yeah.
positionality when I think about it as a chola,
Yeah.
you know? So in order for you to say what you need to say and also to get the agenda out that you need to get out.
Yeah. So that leads me to then allyship and just sort of what could that look like now? And I say that because, well, let me back up a little because I, when I heard the news and, the next day, I think there was just quite a bit of anger towards white women, and just there was a lot of anger. And also, I was up against my own identity as a Desi American, knowing that South Asian Americans also have this proximity to whiteness and white supremacy. And I've seen them act a fool, like my own people
Sure.
act a fool. And so I think my question then is, there's allyship, and what does that look like now at this moment in terms of speaking and holding space for those who need the space to have a voice, but then also allies reflecting on themselves and their own identity in this in the next 4 years and moving forward. What, like, I hope it's not too off, but I feel like they're connected in my mind.
I agree. I too am critically reviewing the memberships and identities that I am a part of that participate in both the outcome of this election and in the supremacies that both harm me, those same communities, and other marginalized communities around me.
Yeah.
And where does allyship now go? I think I'm thinking about a few things. I don't have an answer, but what I'm visualizing. Where do our Palestinians go when Gaza has been blown to smithereens? Where do they go? Where do the Ukrainians go when their land has been blown away and their country gets smaller and smaller? Where are they? Where are they going? Where do you go when climate change is so severe that we see the whole southern part of our entire hemisphere by necessity becoming climate refugees and having to migrate north in order for survival, and they reach up against these fake borders and then are called things like degenerates, illegals, felons,
Criminals, yeah.
rapists. In reality, they probably represent the best of us in terms of knowing how to survive and trying to make it to the next stage. Where do they go? And in that global context of seeing the planet shrinking for so many different populations, both human and more than human species, where does our allyship arrive? Well, a few things come to mind. I think it will be important that we can hold space for all of those events to happen at once and not needing to hide from them. You hear a lot like, pick your battles. Fair. But you know what? Pick them in context
Yeah.
of all of these things. Let all of those things inform you, even though your focus might be on the unsheltered, or your focus might be on climate change. Your focus might be on trans rights. Your focus might be on immigration rights. But if you don't place your allyship in the context of all these worldly events, your answers will be short-sighted. Number one. Number two, we lack imagination as collective allies. Tell me the world you want to live in. What does it look like? And then what are we doing to move towards that? So I think as allies, we also need to be sitting down and saying, let's visualize where we're headed. And what's it going to feel like when we get there? And then what kind of ally do I need to be to see that achieved? That may mean also for me as an ally, I need to be sitting in other people's vision work. So, for example, I need to be sitting with Black feminists and hearing their vision work of what a future looks like, where they thrive, and then ask myself as an ally, what's my role in contributing toward that vision? So, centering their vision, making vision of my own, and also holding a bigger space for all these events to inform the way I want to move forward. So complexity, the topic of complexity becomes something that we embrace. We embrace how complex it is. Sometimes we've been replacing that word with the word nuance. The nuance of someone's identity. That can mean the subtle differences of someone that's different, even though you hold the same identities. But what about the complexity of that being? And the meaning not only their subtle differences, but them inside of the context in which they're growing. And what are the bigger structures that are pressing upon them in order for them to make the decisions between three things versus decisions they could make if they had more variety?
Yeah.
So complexity is going to become one of our most valuable tools, alongside a radical imagination and finding ways to center identities that aren't our own, but we want to work behind, alongside, contribute to, but never make it our own, only as folks who love and care deeply about that specific community.
Yeah. There's like such big expansion in just thinking about complexity. That's just, again, another thing that, the way you put it, I don't think about. I get focused on the one or two or three things. And I know that they feed each other, and I know that they're all interconnected, but what you said about we become short-sighted, we become limited. And move, and it's not to, and I love that you were saying that you're not trying to solve everything and stand for everything, because that might be a little tough to do, but to be informed and then move in a different way, that just hearing that feels right, feels more authentic.
Yeah, there's something I don't know.
Yeah.
But I feel it inherently. Maybe you can feel it in your bones too. There's a connection between the genocide of the Palestinians and the unsheltered population of Salt Lake City. I don't know what they are, but I can at least hold both inside of me and wonder what that connection is. Because when I figure it out, it's going to inform me on the parts of social justice that I want to move forward. And the second part is visualizing, what do I want to have happen to the unsheltered?
Right.
And what do I want for the Palestinians? I want the Palestinians to be free.
Yeah.
I want them to thrive. I want them to have joy. I want them to have their land. I want them to be able to move around this planet and not be under the thumb of a different country's occupation
Yeah.
and genocidal thoughts.
Yeah.
And I want for our unsheltered community to not think that, for the community to think, that they put themselves there themselves,
Right.
that it was a structural problem. I don't want them just sheltered.
No.
We can shelter them.
Yeah.
I want their babies to go to school, and I want their babies to feel loved and valued and find where they find purpose and joy and love. So maybe the connection is, I can't see why the two are happening at the same time, but the connection is, I do want to see both groups have joy and love. And I'm not going to be afraid to diagnose the problem
Yeah.
and call it for what it is.
Yeah.
When you see a mass group of people that are being exterminated, the definition of that is
It's genocide.
genocide. And maybe what happens to our unsheltered population as it grows is it's a killing me slowly. Turn up the pot of water a little bit at a time.
And boil me slowly.
Right, because now it's illegal
Yeah.
by the Supreme Court
Yeah.
to be homeless on the street. So where does that send them? Sounds like it sends them into a more incarcerated space.
Yeah. Yeah.
So then where does that inevitably lead to?
Yeah. You're really humanizing these. They're different, but they're not. There's just a humane part that connects all of these things together. And that anyone should be able to relate to some extent, right?
I hope so.
I hope so too.
Yeah. And okay, to add to that, just one small little piece. What happens, and this is a leap, when you give a river its own rights, or you give a lake its own rights, its own sovereignty? Doesn't it get to decide that it has the right to live and to survive? And so on the one hand, humanizing, but also just trying to think about, what does it mean when we give all of life its chance to thrive in general?
Yeah.
Period.
Yeah.
There doesn't need to be a comma there, right? But I know that's can be a hard leap for some cultures. For other cultures, it's been there since the beginning.
Yeah.
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 They would reference a group of trees as people.
Yeah.
And that's part of them. So we can't turn anything living into an it. Like the word Trumpers. When we use that language, we've turned them into an it. We've dehumanized them.
That's right.
But the same would be true about when we do that to other than human species.
Yeah.
So when we re-give them their dignity of saying they are more than that, they're more complex than that, then we are more likely to make the leap towards giving them the rights that they inherently deserve and should hopefully live beyond the boundaries of a specific country, which to some degree is why the United Nations was born in the first place.
Right. Right. So then on that note, and just, you said hope. You mentioned it a few times in this conversation. There is a vast majority of us that are grieving collectively. I've spoken to so many people who that is the word that comes up, is grief. And as they're processing. And so how do we find hope during grieving?
Well, I think for some of your listeners, I don't want you to feel inadequate if you're not feeling hope right now. In fact, I'd like you to feel the opposite. I'd feel like this is exactly what you're supposed to be doing right now. You don't need to feel that feeling. It's like telling somebody, I need you to smile right now when you feel like
Right.
crying.
Right.
If you did smile in that moment, you're doing yourself an injustice.
Mm-hmm.
And yet, I feel like as different people emerge at different times, just like different seedlings do, part of our work for those who emerge from their grief sooner than later is to busy ourselves
Yeah.
with creating the environment for others to join. I think, and in the collective space, if people want to, they should be given every opportunity to find hope.
Yeah.
But if we try to force it on them, the opposite will be true, and they might even get pummeled by their inner critic, which is what we don't want to have happen. So we emerge differently. Your podcast, we did this podcast for this exact reason.
Mm-hmm.
What are the kind of conditions we can create together when we're ready? So when people are trying and are wanting to emerge to find hope, that we are creating the conditions for them to do that, and knowing that every single one of us in our complexities of who we are will need that environment to be a little differently for each of us. But as social justice practitioners, we've always known that. That's what we call equity.
Yeah.
Making sure the space is tailored in order for you to thrive. So we have to get those tools out, remember that, and say that if and when you're ready for hope, we're busying ourselves, ensuring that it's prepared if that's what you need.
Yeah.
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 And so we're going to need all these different groups in their own unique ways, creating collective spaces. And we're going to shop around and try out things and say, this go around, I actually need gay joy.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't need it last time, but this time, that's what I need. Or I need to be in a space that's only identified as women.
Mm-hmm.
That's what I want and I need right now. And I want to be there to say, that's what you need. Let me know how I can support that.
Right.
That's totally fine and beautiful. And I don't need to be there
Yeah.
in that space with you. But 100%, let's get you there.
Yeah. So you just go back to community. You go back to yourself and what you need, and you go back to what your community needs. And that's, I mean, in our last conversation, it's what your whole...
At least I'm consistent.
You're very consistent. That was what it was about. It was about community, connecting. It was about nature. It was about connecting with nature, grounding yourself. You're saying the same themes. It's very consistent. It's just your words are weighing, have a different weight to it right now, and it's hitting at least me right now in this moment. I felt like this was a therapy session that I needed.
Same.
And so I thank you so much. I thank you so much for your voice and your wisdom in walking us through this, and also the affirmations that you gave throughout today, and the affirmations that you continue to give to me individually, our community, those you work with, your inner critic, I just cannot express a level of gratitude that I have towards that. So thank you so much, Kilo. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you. And also, I'm just going to send some tiny little vibes of love to your inner critic right now, because they're doing a really good job with you, taking care of you.
Yeah.
And we need to keep them around.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you. I appreciate you.
I appreciate you too.